You arrive in Susa before dawn, when the air is not yet thick with the unmerciful heat of the day, and the streets are still half swallowed by the bluish shadows of the surrounding hills. The city greets you not with the sound of music, nor the pleasant voices of early merchants, but with the low and repetitive groaning of wooden wheels against stone, the kind of sound that does not celebrate arrival, but rather underlines the inevitability of it. Somewhere beyond the gates, a line of carts waits to be admitted, each one carrying goods that will sooner or later be reduced to neat rows of numbers and brief, unsentimental words on an official scroll. It is a strange thing to think that the royal road, which stretches like a patient, stubborn vein across the empire, is less about speed than about certainty. The road does not hurry because the empire does not hurry. What is meant to arrive will arrive, even if it takes the better part of a season, and if it does not arrive, then it simply did not exist in the eyes of the ledgers. Susa itself is not the dream city the poets speak of when they praise the heart of the empire. It is practical, paved where it needs to be, ornamented where it pleases the king, and otherwise indifferent to the rest. As you make your way toward the administrative quarter, the smell of the place changes. The air here is heavy with lamp oil, ink, dry dust, and the faint sourness of grain sacks that have been stored too long in the sun. The building where you are expected is not grand. It is rectangular, unremarkable, and shaded by an awning that has clearly been mended more than once. Inside, the corridors are narrow, the walls the color of watered clay, and every step you take echoes in a way that suggests the architects valued durability over comfort. Your new superior is waiting in a small room whose only window is half covered with parchment to keep out the glare. He is a man whose age is difficult to guess, for his skin has been folded and creased not by years alone, but by long hours over ink, dust, and bureaucracy. His eyes are tired but exacting. His hands, when they are not resting on the desk, seem to hover over the nearest scroll as though prepared to correct any error the moment it appears. He does not greet you warmly. Instead, he gestures to a low stool beside a table and places before you a half-used scroll, a reed pen, and an inkwell whose surface has formed a thin skin from disuse. You will be of use, he says, though without any particular conviction. Then, without raising his voice or changing his expression, he begins to explain your duties. You are to record, without omission, every item that passes through this checkpoint along the royal road. You will not use abbreviations, because abbreviations invite confusion, and confusion invites inquiry, and inquiry invites punishment. You will learn to distinguish barley from millet by smell alone, because the color changes under different light. You will weigh amphorae with a trained eye before the scales confirm your guess, because the scales are sometimes wrong, and the scales do not answer to the king. The man teaches without flourish, and you understand that this is less a lesson and more a warning. He demonstrates the writing of quantities, always in words, never in figures, and how each entry must be dated with the phase of the moon as well as the regnal year. He shows you how to identify the marks burned into bales and jars. each signifying an origin, a tax rate, and an obligation to some lord or another far away. At one point, a guard passes the doorway, his sandals slapping against the stone. The superior pauses to listen until the sound fades, then continues without explanation. You sense that interruptions here are not welcome, but they are expected. In the corner of the room, there is a chest bound in bronze. You are told it contains older records, some going back beyond living memory, though they are rarely consulted. What is written stays written, the man remarks, not as a poetic observation, but as an unshakable fact. He says this while unrolling a fresh sheet of papyrus, smoothing it with a flat piece of polished bone, and dipping his pen in ink the color of dried blood. By the time the first real caravan of the day arrives, the sun has risen enough to turn the room into a slow oven. You step outside briefly to see them, long lines of mules and camels, drivers shouting half hearted commands, baskets and jars swaying from side to side like tired hearts. The dust they raise is thick enough to turn the air into a dull gold haze. You realize this is what you will see day after day, and that it will be your job to reduce all of it to lists. You return to the desk. The superior slides the first page toward you. The ink is ready. There is no more introduction. The first caravan that you are required to document arrives not with the brisk precision of a well drilled machine, but with the slow resignation of a tired beast that has walked too far in too little shade. The guards at the outer post have already announced its approach, and so you stand in the narrow slice of shadow just outside the doorway, watching it inch toward the city gates as though the stones themselves are holding it back. It comes from the eastern reaches, from lands where the sun rises with an almost hostile brightness, and the air can drink the water from your skin before you have the chance to think about thirst. By the time these animals reach Susa, they have carried the dust of many provinces on their hides. That dust clings to everything: ropes, jars, baskets, even the folds of the driver's robes. Though, of course, you are not here to write about robes. You are here to write about goods. The first mule to pass the checkpoint carries two wide sacks of grain, each tied with coarse rope. Your superior runs his hand along the stitching, not in admiration, but in search of the seal, a small disk of hardened clay, stamped with a symbol that looks like the rising curve of the moon. This, he tells you without looking up, is barley from the southern plain. Write it exactly. He waits while you write the words in full, spelling each out without shortening, because to do otherwise is to invite correction. Behind the mules come camels, their steps measured, their eyes half lidded with a patient disinterest in the human world. They carry amphorae sealed with wax and cloth. The seals here are different. Some carry the emblem of a noble house near Babylon, others the mark of the king's granaries. The contents are varied: wine dark as pomegranate skin, oil with the faint scent of olives, and water for the road ahead. Every item is noted, every origin recorded, and every container described, because to omit such details is to assume they will be remembered later. They will not. The dust grows thicker as the caravan unloads. It catches in your throat, leaving a taste that is neither sweet nor bitter, but simply dry, like a word half formed. Somewhere in the middle of the procession are rolls of cloth, dyed in shades that the ink on your scroll will not capture, deep reds, pale blues, the faint yellow of faded sunlight. You learn to weigh them in your mind. Silk is lighter, wool is heavier, linen somewhere between. Your superior checks your writing with the speed of someone who has been doing so for decades, his pen ready to slash corrections into the parchment should you forget even one descriptive term. By the time the last cart is unloaded, the courtyard is a chaos of empty baskets, trailing ropes, and restless animals. The merchants speak among themselves in low voices, occasionally glancing toward the record table where you sit. You suspect they are wondering whether today's records will be as accurate as yesterday's and whether it matters. Your superior speaks to none of them, and so neither do you. That evening, as you close the scroll with a wooden rod and tie it with string, you notice that certain items appear on the list without ever having been physically checked. There is a column in which such goods are marked with a faint stroke of red ink, a sign perhaps of their special status or their special invisibility. You do not ask. You sense instinctively that asking would mark you as inexperienced in the most dangerous way. In this place, the less you remark upon, the more you can keep your place. On the following day, another caravan arrives, this one from the west, where the air smells faintly of the sea and the goods are wrapped to protect against salt. You note dried figs packed in reed baskets, copper ingots bound in leather, and small jars of a perfume so strong that even the guards lean back as the seals are broken. The process is the same: identify, record, confirm, repeat. It becomes apparent that the work is not in the recording itself, but in the repetition, the slow layering of one identical day upon another until they form a structure heavier than stone. Yet there are moments that catch your attention. A cartload of dates from the southern oases arrives in a container made of palm fronds woven so tightly you can hardly see the fruit inside. A bolt of cloth arrives from Lydia, so fine and so pale that it almost disappears in the light. A merchant hands over a small casket of stones, not jewels exactly, but polished in a way that suggests they are meant for someone's table or altar. Your superior never comments on the beauty or the rarity of the goods. To him, a sack of barley and a jar of perfume are the same, quantities to be recorded, origins to be marked, and weights to be confirmed. His pen scratches with the same rhythm no matter the nature of the cargo. When the day ends, you find your fingers stained with ink and smelling faintly of dust and grain. The records for the day are rolled, sealed, and placed into the bronze-bound chest in the corner. You are told that tomorrow will be the same, and the day after, and the day after that. This is not a warning, nor a promise. It is simply a fact, as unmoving as the road itself. You learn, without a ceremony and without applause, that the work is not measured by novelty, but by sameness. Morning follows morning, with the precision of an official seal impressed on wet clay. The oil in the lamps is replenished. The shutters are adjusted to the angle of the sun. The broom whispers across the floor stones, and you sit in the same place at the same table with the same pen that grows a little more obedient to your hand each day. The room smells of dust, lamp smoke, and a thin thread of vinegar from the jar where dried reed nibs soften. If there is music here, it is the scratch of ink on papyrus and the dry cough of a guard in the corridor. Your superior favors repetition over instruction. He tells you once how an entry must be composed, and then expects the lesson to reproduce itself endlessly. Each line begins with the regnal year written out in full, followed by the phase of the moon, followed by the origin of the goods named without flourish, followed by the count spelled in words, followed by the seal mark described as if you are teaching a child to draw, and followed finally by that small phrase that carries the weight of a hammer on stone, received without contest. You come to admire that phrase. It is neat, final, and indifferent. It closes a matter without argument, and it closes your thoughts along with it. Measures become a language you now think in. You can feel, in your forearm, the difference between a light amphora for wine and a heavier one for oil. You can smell the rank sweetness of old figs and tell how many weeks they have ridden on a cart. Your hand, when it lays on a bale of wool, can judge the press of the fibers and the dryness that will make a merchant complain of weight loss to the road. You are taught to write the complaint before it is voiced, because the complaint itself is repetitive, and there is no sense wasting breath on lines that ink already knows by heart. You are shown the box of weights used to verify the scales. Each one is dull, smooth, handled by so many steady fingers that the corners have softened like bread left in water. You learn to distrust the scales as a matter of habit. The balance lies not in the beam, but in the phrases that record what passes. The beam can tip from heat or draft or clumsy hands. Ink does not tip. Ink accumulates. Midday, every day, a runner from the road station leaves a strip of rough fiber with a mark that indicates whether the northern relays are functioning, whether horses have failed, whether an axle has splintered on a sun-hardened rut. You never meet the runner. He passes the door, breathless and efficient, and the strip appears at the end of your table as if the building itself has exhaled it. Your superior glances once and files it among other strips whose messages are almost identical. The similarity soothes him. Order is the empire's preferred drug, and the office is the spoon that warms it. The chest in the corner, banded with bronze and dully patient, becomes a second horizon for you. In its belly rest the voices of long days that never had names. When you open it to place the new scrolls in neat bundles tied with cord, you glimpse older records, their edges feathered, their ink faded to the color of smoke. Here and there, a mark of a clerk long dead is visible, a small flourish that once promised personality and now promises only the persistence of handwriting. You find a scroll whose beginning has partially peeled away from its rod, and your fingers, disobedient for once, unroll a little more. Inside are inventories of grain and wool, wine and oil, iron and copper, written in the same unremarkable hand that all official hands eventually become. The years named are from reigns you have only heard in the slow speech of priests. You roll it back and feel something like humility, or perhaps fatigue, masquerading as humility. Afternoons are devoted to verification. Verification is the secular liturgy of the office. You recheck quantities that were already counted in the morning, and you reweigh amphorae that tilted true hours ago, and you rewrite lines that already lie legible and correct. You learn the sacred chain of custody for a word, spoken by the merchant, repeated by the guard, recorded by the clerk, reviewed by the superior, sealed by the office, stored by the chest, and eventually forgotten by everyone except the chest. In time, your ear begins to pick up the fine differences among silences. There is the silence of agreement, the silence of boredom, and the silence that means a line has been written that should not be read too closely. You respect the last one as you would respect a sanctified threshold. Once, near twilight, a caravan arrives late, and the lamps lend everything the color of weak honey. The goods are not remarkable, but the order of them is wrong. Wine appears where oil should be, copper where wool should be, a bale of papyrus where figs should be. You begin to correct the order, and your superior stops you with a hand that does not touch, but somehow restrains. He indicates the seals with the smallest flick of the eyes. The seals do not object to the arrangement. The seals are the empire's eyelids, and they are closed. You write the list as it lies, and you add that final phrase, received without contest, with a care that feels like prayer. You come to understand why the old scrolls look alike. The office has perfected a style that resists both poetry and error. It has no room for individual zeal. If you attempt a flourish, the pen catches and leaves a blot that will be a reprimand in the morning. If you compress a word to fit a margin, you are invited to rewrite the whole line, because margins, like the king, are not to be negotiated with. The boredom is not accidental. The boredom is policy. Neighbors you never meet leave their presence in residue. A mason's dust settles on the sill. A perfumer's excess scent drifts through the passages when his jars are inspected at the courtyard drains. A scribe from the court offices, passing with his bundle of edicts, sheds a single curl of shavings from a reed he pared too thin. These fragments accumulate in the corners and seams like crumbs under a table. You occasionally sweep them into a small pan and carry them out to the yard, where the wind reclaims them with the efficiency of a clerk who hates untidy shelves. When rain comes, it does not hurry. It arrives as a rumor that becomes a smell that becomes a patter on the awning. Everyone performs the same set of slow motions. The shutters are lowered to the carefully memorized height. The scrolls are moved a hand's breadth farther from the window. The ink lids are pressed more firmly. The guards at the door exchange places with the expression of men who expect to be wet for as long as the empire lasts. You discover that damp makes papyrus sigh when unrolled, a sound like old men rising from a bench. At night, when the last line is written and the wax seals are pressed with the office stamp, You tie the ribbon with a knot you now make without thinking. Your fingers have learned more than your mind has. You slide the scroll into the chest among the neat cylinders that resemble the vertebrae of a great sleeping animal. The lid falls with a short, familiar complaint. You extinguish the lamp with a breath and watch the wick make a thin ghost of smoke, which turns and disappears through the same hole in the shutter where the day came in. Small superstitions take root because great beliefs are too large for the narrow room. You tap the inkwell thrice each morning before first use, because once the ink sputtered and left a break in a crucial word. You smooth the first span of papyrus with the bone spatula in a ritual of 5 strokes from left to right and 5 strokes from right to left, because a wrinkle once caused a misreading that cost a merchant 2 jars of oil from an already thin stock. You close each day with your hand flat on the chest lid for the space of 3 breaths, because the chest holds your words now, and you wish for them to sleep instead of wander. Rumors arrive as consistently as the runners, and they are just as uninvited. You hear of skirmishes on a distant frontier and of a noble house arguing tax rates with a priesthood that has no patience for arithmetic. You hear that a section of the royal road near the mountains has been washed out and rebuilt with stones scavenged from a forgotten temple. Your superior receives these accounts with the same look he gives a smudge on a margin. The road continues. The entries continue. The empire is a beast that eats sameness and grows fat on it. One evening, while copying an especially long consignment of barley from the southern plain, you feel a resistance in your hand that is not fatigue. The words themselves begin to seem heavier, as if barley in the abstract has mass and can weigh down a pen. You set the pen down, flex your fingers, and look out through the slit of window at a sky that is already losing its color. A bird crosses the gap, small and determined, navigating air as you navigate lines. You return to the scroll and finish the entry with an obedience that feels indistinguishable from understanding. Days become stacks. Weeks become bundles tied with string. Months become a layer at the bottom of the chest. You suspect that years, when they come, will look only like more bundles, heavier to lift. In a corner of your mind, a needless question tries to form. What would happen if you stopped? The office answers before you finish thinking it. Another hand would take your pen, another pen would take your line, another line would find its way to the chest. What is written stays written, and what is unwritten waits without anxiety. At last, you can write an entire caravan's worth of entries with the same inward quiet with which a potter shapes bowls without naming them. You have ceased to imagine the people who will drink oil, or bake grain, or wear cloth. You record the world as it passes the threshold and becomes smaller, flatter, and more permanent than the world itself. The monotony becomes not a failure of the senses, but their deliverance from distraction. Your humor dries and darkens into a private irony. You, who arrived to help the empire count, now count the empire's hours by the number of times you write received without contest, and you do not contest it. The royal road has no single scent. It changes as it passes from plain to mountain, from river valley to desert edge, and it carries those scents like a trader carries a pack, layered, mingled, and worn smooth from long use. You learn its moods not by walking it, but by what arrives at your desk. The road speaks in the language of goods, wheat dust from the north, resin from cedar chests in the west, grit from the deserts that clings to amphora seals even after they have been wiped. Every caravan is a phrase in the long, unbroken sentence the empire has been writing for decades, without pause or breath. You hear of its length often, the road from Susa to Sardis, counted in days so numerous that their total is always spoken in the slow, deliberate way that makes large numbers heavier. Officially, riders can cover the distance in far fewer days than a caravan, changing horses at the royal stations. This fact is repeated in proclamations and speeches as though speed itself were a form of tribute. But the road you know is not the gallop of couriers. It is the shuffle of animals and the plodding weight of carts. The goods take their time because goods are patient, and the road is even more patient than goods. Your superior keeps a map rolled in a leather case. You have seen it only twice. Once, when a visiting inspector asked for proof of the number of stations between Susa and the farthest outpost, the superior unrolled the map without comment, pointed to the stations in sequence, and rolled it again before you could read any names. The second time, a section had to be checked against the reports from a relay post where a bridge had washed away. You noticed that the map had no decorative border, no bright dyes to make the land seem alive, only the thin, careful lines of roads, rivers, and mountains, marked in the same hand that might draw up a list of grain sacks. Sometimes goods arrive in small, sharp bursts, a courier's load, an urgent delivery of metal for a forge, or dried herbs for a temple ceremony that cannot wait. More often, the road delivers its weight in long, slow breaths. Grain in the cool months, oil before the summer feasts, cloth before the seasons of tribute. It is not a calendar you keep, but a rhythm, measured not in moons or years, but in the spacing between one kind of cargo and its return. The merchants, when they speak freely, which is rarely, describe the road stations. They speak of the shallow wells, where the water is bitter but necessary, the stone markers that rise from the dust like solitary sentries, and the inns where the walls are carved with names in scripts from half the empire. You imagine these places as you write, though you know you will likely never see them. The names of towns you have never visited begin to feel like old acquaintances, repeated in your ledger as often as the names of the provinces around Susa. The road has its dangers, but they are not the ones you might imagine from stories. It is not brigands or raiders that merchants complain of most, though they exist, but the smaller, more constant obstacles, broken axles, spoiled grain, lost pack animals. A single missing camel can delay a caravan by days, not because the load cannot be shifted, but because the agreement written in some distant hall must be rewritten to match the altered reality. Until it is rewritten, the goods might as well be stones in a field. Your superior says little of politics, but when he does, it is always tied to the road. He speaks of how a governor's loyalty can be measured by the condition of the stations under his authority, how a rebellion in the hills will first show itself in the late arrival of a certain kind of shipment. The road is the empire's pulse, he says once, not to you, but to himself, as though repeating something he has long believed, but never needed to prove. When the seasons turn, the road changes its voice. In the spring rains, mud clings to the hooves of horses and mules, slowing them until the journey doubles in length. In the summer, dust rises in clouds that stain cloth and settle into the cracks of amphora lids, no matter how tightly sealed. In autumn, winds carry the scent of drying grain far ahead of the carts, so that the city smells the harvest before it sees it. In winter, frost silvers the road at dawn, and the caravans arrive later, their drivers wrapped in layers of cloth stiffened by the cold. Sometimes no one arrives for days. The courtyard is empty, the air still, the ink drying in the well between entries. Those days are the quietest and the most oppressive. You would think that the absence of goods would be a relief, but it is the opposite. Without the steady arrival and recording, the office feels unmoored, as though the empire has stopped breathing and everyone is waiting for it to resume. When finally a caravan does arrive, even one small and unimpressive, the sound of hooves and wheels is like the first cough after a long silence. There are rumors that parts of the road are older than the empire itself, that the stones under certain bridges were laid by a people whose names no one remembers. The merchants call these stretches the old bones of the road. They claim the stones wear slower there, that they hold the memory of countless footsteps, and that the road will outlast the empire as easily as it has outlasted the people who built it. You believe them. The road does not care who rules as long as something walks upon it. In the office, you mark each caravan's arrival in the same dry hand as always. It does not matter if the goods have crossed mountains, deserts, or rivers swollen with meltwater. The entries are written in the same sequence: date, origin, cargo, quantity, seal. There is no space for the journey's hardships or for the beauty of the places passed. The road may be the empire's artery, but here, in ink, it is reduced to a thin line of words. You begin to wonder if the road itself knows you, if it senses the hands that record its deliveries without ever stepping beyond the city's edge. Perhaps it does not need to. Perhaps the road, like the chest in the corner, remembers in its own way, and you are just another brief caretaker in its endless work. By now, you understand something your first days did not teach you. The road is not only a path between cities, it is a method, a habit, a discipline. It repeats itself the way the ledgers do, the way the empire does. It stretches, bends, and suffers small wounds, but it does not break. And like the ink you press into the scroll, it will hold its shape long after you have put down the pen. The day you leave begins the way every other day has begun. There is no ceremonial change in the air, no sudden shift in the quality of the light. The oil in the lamps is measured, the shutters are tilted to the same precise angle, to keep out the glare from the courtyard, and the first list of the morning waits on your desk with the same silent authority as all the others. You could almost believe you will be here tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until your hand forgets how to hold the pen. Your superior does not remark on your departure. If he knows, he hides it under the same folds of habit that have hidden all his thoughts for as long as you have known him. He moves through the room as always, his sandals whispering against the stone, his hand steady on the reed pen, his eyes flicking to the margin of your work, now and then with mechanical precision. If there is any farewell here, it is contained in the fact that he does not correct you once today. The chest in the corner has grown heavier in your mind. You have fed it for years with careful bundles of scrolls, each one tied with string that frayed slightly under your fingers, each one carrying the dry weight of days reduced to lists. You open it one last time. The scrolls inside lie as they always have, layered, cylindrical, pressed against one another, like the ribs of a creature so large it has forgotten the shape of its own body. The oldest scrolls are pale as ash. The newest ones still hold the faint smell of the ink you mixed. If you placed your hand deep enough, you could touch the year you began, and the year before that, and years no one alive remembers. But you do not. You close the lid gently, and the bronze bindings give their familiar sigh. Outside, the courtyard is half full with a caravan unloading amphorae. The seals are inspected, the counts are called, and the goods are stacked in orderly rows. You could take the pen and write it all without error, but today you are only an observer. The smell of oil mixes with the smell of dust. A fly circles the rim of a jar, trapped in the slow eddy of heat rising from the stones. The sound of the road is here, contained in the shuffle of hooves and the creak of leather harness. You realize that you will hear this sound in your mind long after you no longer hear it with your ears. You do not take much with you: a small pouch of coins, a rolled piece of cloth for travel, a drinking vessel wrapped in linen. The pen you used most often rests on the table where it belongs. It will belong to another soon enough. Perhaps they will hold it as you did, with a grip that learned to be firm, but not too firm, so the ink could flow in an unbroken line. Perhaps they will tap it 3 times before writing, though no one will tell them to. Leaving the administrative quarter takes longer than you expect. The corridors are narrow, and each turn is a memory you had not intended to keep. The small crack in the plaster where a lamp once fell, the uneven flagstone near the doorway that caught your sandal more than once, the faint discoloration on the wall where a chart once hung and was taken down without explanation. These details seem to hold more weight now, as if they have been waiting for you to notice them before you go. At the gate, the guards nod without interest. To them, your coming and going is no different from the coming and going of a cart, or a mule, or a barrel of figs. You pass into the street and feel the sunlight full on your face, unfiltered by shutters or awnings. The air smells of bread from a nearby oven, and for a moment you are struck by the strange fact that bread has never appeared in the ledgers, only the grain that becomes it. You follow a smaller road at first, one that will lead you to the main route out of the city. It is not the royal road, though it will join it eventually. Here, the stones are rougher, the markers smaller, and the traffic thinner. Still, the rhythm of travel is the same. The slow negotiation of carts with their loads, the steady beat of hooves, the measured distance between one voice calling and the next answering. The empire feels less grand here, but no less persistent. When you reach the point where this road meets the royal road, you pause. You see the travelers coming and going, their faces already set toward their destinations, their goods wrapped and sealed. The road stretches in both directions, disappearing into the horizon with the same calm certainty as ink lines on a scroll. You will not travel its full length. Few ever do, but you will take a part of it with you, and it will take a part of you in return. The sound of the city fades behind you. The stones under your feet are warmer now, holding the memory of the day's sun. You walk until you find a place to rest, a small rise where you can see the road curling away into the distance. The air here is still, and the dust hangs low, lit by the last of the afternoon light. You think of the scrolls in the chest, of the lists you have written, of the goods that passed through your hands without ever belonging to you. You think of the road's endless patience, how it accepts whatever walks it, carries it forward, and forgets it without malice. You realize, with the same quiet certainty that marked your first day, that nothing you have written will vanish. The scrolls will remain, bound and sealed, long after the jars have been emptied, the grain eaten, the cloth worn to threads. They will describe goods that no longer exist, in words written by hands that no longer live. They will be read, perhaps, by someone as disinterested as you once were, who will write their own lists and seal them in the chest without thinking of you at all. The sun dips lower, and the road darkens slightly in its shallow grooves. You stand, adjust the strap of your bundle, and begin walking again, not toward an ending, but toward another entry in the great, unending ledger that the road itself seems to keep. Your feet make their own quiet marks on the dust, and behind you, the road swallows them as it always has, without contest.